Hello, Prodigy Finance student, and welcome to our guide on internship interviews. This is the last stage on the internship roadmap, so congratulations for reaching this far. So let's talk a little bit about how this guide will be broken up and what you can expect from these interviews. In the first place, we will talk about preparation. So this is where we will discuss everything you need to do to be prepared for this process. Then we will talk about the practice that is necessary to have a wonderful performance. Thirdly, we will talk about the actual performance, the interview, which will be followed by a play-by-play where we will break down each section of how the interview will go. And lastly, the push, which is a very important step in making sure that you leave behind a great impression. So for these internship interviews, you're going to want to treat them like regular job interviews. This is because the hope is that if you succeed in securing your internship, this will lead to a full-time role once you have completed your studies. So let's talk about how to prepare for the internship interview. Before you go into the interview, even before you practice, you want to experience this radical empathy. This means that you want to put yourself in the place of the recruiter. You want to imagine what exactly they're feeling during the process. Maybe they've just had 10 interviews, so they're feeling very tired. Or maybe they're simply looking for another colleague to help with an overworked problem. Either way, if you can figure out what your recruiter's pain point is, you want to tailor your answers in order to respond as best as possible to this pain point. This will happen in the first 2 to 5 minutes of the interview when you have a little get to know you chat. Get a feel for how the recruiter is acting and see if you can put yourself in their shoes. Now let's talk about how to practice for the actual interview. The first thing you're going to want to do is make sure you know the job description down pat. This means look at the qualities, skills, and experiences they are asking for in the job description. Once you know these, see how you can customize your own experiences and strengths in order to stand out and really apply to the job at hand. What may help is to look at the 1 to 2 stories that we've listed already and match these stories up with an example and a lesson you learned that is in the job description. The next step is to think about what type of interview is this going to be. Is it going to be a case interview, for example, in a consulting job opportunity? In this case, you want to brush up on all your cases. Here you also want to think about what kind of questions you might be asked. If this interview is with a hiring manager, you may experience some hypothetical questions. For instance, they may say, give one example of when you had to deal with conflict, or what would you do in this instance? A lot of these common hypothetical questions can be found online, so spend some time Googling these basic questions and make sure you have an answer ready. Next comes the very key questions that you're going to want to be able to answer. We will discuss some of these key questions later on. The last step is to practice, practice, practice. One of the best ways to do this is with a friend. This way you simulate a real live experience and they can ask you questions that you haven't prepared for. If you don't have a friend handy, feel free to look into a mirror. I know it sounds kind of silly, but psychologists have actually shown that talking to yourself in a mirror is a good way to practice for a real event. Now let's spend some time looking at the different interview formats. Beyond just the one-on-one, there are many formats. You may have a call, which is typically at the beginning of an internship. This is just a way for them to screen for your personality and the very rudimentary skills that the internship may require. You may also experience a casual interview when you go out for a drink or go have lunch, for example. While these are also very casual, it is important to remain a professional. But at the same time, feel free not to talk about just the job and get to know each other a little bit and chit chat. Another form of interviews are the group interview. This will generally consist of you and 3 or 4 other candidates. Here they are really looking to see how you problem solve and also how you interact with others. There is also the panel interview where you will be interviewed by 3 or 4 other people within the company. This generally happens and is conducted by your future potential colleagues, and they really just want to get to know you and get a feel for you. The group and the panel interview usually happen at later stages of the interview process, and as we know, there are many stages. One of the questions that some of our students have had trouble with is this: what is your greatest weakness? Well, it sounds relatively simple. There are a few key guidelines. The first is you don't want to rule yourself out of the interview process by saying something like, I don't work well with others, or I can't be around computers too long. At the same time, you want to display some humility by saying an actual weakness and not something like, I'm a perfectionist or I work too hard. Our advice is to share feedback you've received in the past about something and to illustrate how you went about improving that weakness. And finally, what were the results of your effort? For instance, in my own career, I was told that my meetings were running a little too fast for people to keep up with. So I hired a career coach and actually learned how to slow down my meetings by giving out meeting briefs at the beginning of the interview, asking every 5 to 10 minutes if everyone was still following me. And in the end, my colleagues actually came up to me and told me they really appreciated my effort, that they had noticed a significant difference in the tempo and their ability to follow my meetings. Now let's think about your performance during the interview and look at some common do's and don'ts. For one, you're going to want to make sure that you arrive early. This is extremely important because in many cultures, arriving late is a sign of disrespect. You're also going to want to be dressed nicely, generally one level above what you would dress on the average day in the job. This may mean you have to wear a suit and tie. You're going to want to bring a notepad as well so you can jot down any notes. Make sure that you come with a good mood, show enthusiasm, and ask questions. Alright, now let's look at an in-detail play-by-play of the interview. So, as we mentioned, once you've gotten there, you'll generally have about 2 to 5 minutes of chit-chat. This may happen just in the elevator or walking down the hallway to the boardroom where you're going to be meeting. The next 5 to 10 minutes is generally spent on self-reflection questions. This is where they might ask you what your biggest weakness is, what are your strengths, or other questions about your personality. After this comes 15 to 20 minutes that is focused on technical, interview-specific questions. If you're in banking, this may include questions about market share or other hypotheticals in the finance world, or if you're in consulting, it may be a case study, for instance. The last step is 5 to 10 minutes at the end where you get to ask questions. It's important not to ask too many questions as you don't want to go way over time, as your interviewer most likely has many other things scheduled during the day. Likewise, you also don't want to ask questions here about company benefits or salary. Save those for the hiring manager. What you do want to do is ask questions about your colleagues, for instance, their career path or what they think of their time at the company. Here are examples of a few good questions that you can ask. How do you measure performance? What sort of training or developmental opportunities are available in this role? How would you describe the company culture? What makes your company stand out from others in the industry? And lastly, you don't want to forget the push. This is where, generally before 24 hours have passed since your interview, you want to send a follow-up. This can be in the form of a handwritten letter, or it can be in an email if handwriting seems a little weird. Here you want to basically thank the interviewer for their time, answer any of their follow-up questions, and show that you remember something about the interview. This is an extremely important part, as it is generally an expected norm to send a follow-up email. And that's it for our guide on interviewing well. Good luck.